Before we dive into the video, a quick word from our sponsor, Tradestation. As tape readers, we rely heavily on Tradestation for their time and sales. Tradestation offers ATC students an account representative, zero in commission, and a cash reward with qualifying deposits. Now back to the video. Hello and welcome everyone to the 12th ATC Tape Reading Podcast. My name is David Torres and I've been a longtime student with ATC. A couple announcements before we jump into the podcast. So we have night shift reviews every weekday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Those are free for anybody, free for now. We will close those eventually once that room gets too crowded. Chat room is the lowest it has been for a very long time. And we also have a 20-hour course included. So 1 through 4 course, and it's free for all of those new members, and it's just a ridiculous deal. And we also have live classes coming up the 15th, which is next week. So, feel free to message us if you're interested in those. With that taken care of, it's my pleasure to introduce Rich Lepis, CEO and head instructor of Ahead of the Charts. Rich, how are we doing today? Check, mic. Can you hear me?
Yep, can you hear me loud and clear?
Yep, sweet. Okay, sweet. So let's just jump into it. So this podcast is going to be focused on personalities. So personality of stock, personality of the way it prints, just everything to do with personality. It's been a big theme as of the last week of questions that kept come about. So we're going to hit personality, and then we're going to kind of work our way to combining all the personalities, traits, and variables to set up the proper one through 4 trade for high percentage. So Rich, what are the categories of a stock personality? Just kind of a general question, but there's obviously the money time personalities and the building time personalities, if we're just dividing those into two.
So, I mean, this is great. I love this topic, just first of all, because it's what we did last class. So it's going to be a good refresher going into it. So really what I look for is, I always tell everybody, in order to interpret something, you need some type of baseline to really understand what you're looking at and how it's actually interpreted within the, relative to how a stock is actually trading. So really my scale that I look at is a stock in a building mode, or is it on the opposite side of the scale, which it's money time. Now, obviously it can fall into the middle part of the category where it builds and it goes in money time, it builds and it goes in money time. But those are kind of the two set sides of the scale that I typically look at. So when a stock's in a building position, so many people, or building personality, so many people think that just means consolidation. That's not really true. It really, when you go to the side of the scale that's building, really what it is at the end of the day is it's that they're acquiring shares more than they're trying to move the range of the stock. And when we talk about range, we talk about north to south, essentially. So the range of overall day is going to be from when it hit from the top to the bottom, the total amount from top to bottom or bottom to top, depending on the situation, that stock can move. So there's a few different ways that a stock can be in a building position. A stock can be going straight up with a beautiful trend, but can build every 10 cents if it wants to. Versus there's some stocks that will actually build an entire day or into months, or so on and so forth. And then we go into what the money time aspect of it is. And the way that I like to define that is that it's every trader's dream. If you ever hear the beginner's luck of a trader, they come in and all of a sudden it's just that easy. They click the button, they make money. And that's that type of day. When a stock is in a money time personality for an entire day, it's literally just, if you click the button and you follow the trend, at some point you're going to make your money. Now, as we know, most stocks are going to fall way more into the middle because, a stock that's just in money time all day and a stock that's just in a build all day. And we're talking, obviously, it has to have volume, because if there's no volume, it looks like a stock's building all day. But as long as it has volume, those two are a lot, fewer and far between than when you're going to find a personality of both that come into them. Because it's real easy to see when a stock is just on an uptrend, it does nothing but go straight up. And it's real easy to see when a stock is just constantly building and not really getting that north to south movement. But it's about understanding the sections of the stock and the parts of the stock and where a personality change could be, could actually come into play. But really, that's where it starts on the sides of the scale for me. Is it the stock trying to build, or is the stock, is the person that we're following the prints from, are they actually trying to make money towards their position at that moment?
So there's definitely a scale of, one being building personality and one on the other side being complete money time personality, where it's giving no real pullbacks and it's just ripping and it's a retail dream, right? So, and there's
Mhm.
a scale of everything in between. And I feel like where most traders get caught is in that in between, because it's so easy to see, okay, this stock's, it's just number one trades or number three trades, the building type of trades are just obvious and clear and they're significant, they're clear. So it's obvious that, they're
In
printing.
my opinion, my favorite types of stocks to trade. If
Yeah.
you can find one of those, it's not even worth going out there and trying to do more work for the same amount.
Yeah. So
But
you
as
see,
we know, that's not, something that just is popping up across the board for most of the time.
yeah. And I've noticed that's honestly maybe a little less as of late. I've noticed a lot more two and four trades than maybe one and threes, but that's just
Mhm.
more of market personality, which really is a
Well,
conversation for a later date.
that, that's also going to have a lot to do with the fact that it's been a sector.
Mm.
So as we know, the past week or so, everything's been energy and it's been trading out of pocket, out of characteristic.
Retail
So
dream almost.
so you're seeing a lot more of that. Let's just follow the trend. Let's follow towards the prints than you have been, in going back even a month ago.
Hmm.
Because with everything that's going on, I'll never bring news or politics or anything in, but everything that's going on in the world, there's certain sectors right now that are hot. I mean, in the morning time, the past that at least, I know all of this week at least, and going into last week, it's pretty much you just see energy stocks popping up on your scanners. So it's something to take into account because we
Yeah.
just talked about what kind of the scale of personality that we have within a stock itself. But when you really break it down, just like there's different time frames and charts where you
Hmm.
could have a 30-minute, you could have a day chart, minute chart, so on and so forth. It's actually personality falls into those same categories because the personality of a 5-minute chart might be different than the personality of a 1-minute chart. It's not really just the time frame of it, but that comes down to personality of day or
Mm.
personality of the time period that we're actually trading during. And right now, like you said, there's a lot more of those trades towards the prints because of the fact that this isn't going to last. I mean, you can pull up some of these energy stocks where, for instance, USEG, and I know, that's it's not well, I mean, it was a huge mover, but a stock like that, a month from now, we might never trade it again.
Hmm.
So understanding that kind of personality of the climate of the market itself and what sectors are actually hitting right now has a big play into it too. Understanding that what side of the scale the personality fits into the overall, and then taking that over into the individual.
Yeah, and I think that's something that the newer traders or students or people in the learning phase fail to define that scale, right? I think just conceptually, the newer traders look at the prints and like, okay, this is the one through four trade that needs to happen based upon the prints, but you're failing to truly analyze the personality beforehand before you even are allowed to decide or dissect which one through four is allowed. So, understanding the personality of day and stock is a precursor to defining which one through four is allowed. And I feel like students just
Mhm.
have it completely backwards. And I know I did as well, in which, becomes a big frustrating aspect, and you're looking in your journals of, well, these prints indicating build, but what am I missing? And overall, that's that personality. So next kind of question to follow up is, what characteristics or clues are left behind with those personalities? Let's just looking at the two extremes. It could be one being complete build and the other one being no build at all and money time. What clues are left behind within that? I understand, like, maybe some sector personality has just been ripping, but overall, like, maybe within the tape, what kind of clues are, you know, maybe it's off level buying, maybe it's, total volume. Is there certain clues that are left behind?
I mean, you kind of just hit the nail on the head. It's something that we've noticed recently, and just as a tape reader, our job is to always and constantly looking for patterns that we're seeing. And the reaction and those off-level prints as of late have been telling such a story, especially with these stocks that are more towards the money time side of things than they are towards the building side. Because if a stock's towards the building side of things, you don't see a lot of short-term prints coming in because there's, the overall dominant market maker that's controlling the stock. If they're telling you things are going to take a long time to trade, the actual traders themselves that are looking to make money now, that's what we do, you're not going to see as many of them coming out in comparison to when you see these energy stocks that have been going on these rips, for especially the cheaper ones for $2, $3, $4, $5 that are coming into it. You'll notice we're just getting blatant, obvious short-term prints that are surrounding these controlling prints that we see. So it's almost like when we see, if we just see controlling prints, we have to base all of our calculations, what our expectations of what the stock is going to do based off those controlling prints. But when they're completely surrounded by all of these shorter term prints, what it's telling us is that it's actually giving us the intention of what the building print showed. They're showing us they're not looking to build a lot. And it's just if you go back to any of the nightly reviews over the past 2 weeks, you'll notice that there's just so many of these off level prints that are just telling you this is what's going to happen. And it's almost that you get your controlling prints, and from that, the personality is being interpreted by, does it have those shorter term prints coming in versus it doesn't. So it's a real great indication to understand that if even the market maker shows you they're looking to build, at the end of the day, we don't really know exactly what position they're looking to build. And we have our calculations based off increments, based off volume, based off print personality, the amount of prints that are actually out there. We have those calculations, but when someone comes in and shows a bunch of controlling prints at a major level, I always use the number 5. So let's say 5. We have a huge amount of aspirants that come in that show it really should build. Our indication that it's not, it's more of that money time right now. And I'm using energy just because if you've been trading in the past 2 weeks, and you haven't traded an energy stock, you're doing something very wrong. But I keep using that coming in, and you can see that there's just the personality is coming up in those shorter term prints. And that's another big thing that we have to look at. If we're looking to take a trade while they're looking to build, we don't want those shorter term prints. Okay, because that gives us the opportunity to actually come back and build. But when those shorter term prints are coming in, they're not going to let the stock drop for $2 for 6 days before they're looking to make 50s. It just doesn't work that way. So even just talking about identifying personality, it has so much to do with those supporting prints that come in afterwards that really give us the indication of, are they looking to build? Okay, is it a building type stock, or are they looking to, to actually make their money? And one of the funny things that we've noticed as well, if you go back to these recordings, is that when you see these shorter term prints that are coming in, all of a sudden, when it's really time to change its personality, you see drastic controlling prints come in, and you start to see those shorter term prints really start to slow down. And these big moves, it's so funny because a lot of the reads have just been so simple. There really hasn't been a lot that goes to it.
Yeah, and kind of on that topic, Oxy as an example today had great ass prints. I believe it was 59. It was way above
Mhm.
print personality, and we ended up getting no reaction above in terms of shorter term off level to really show continuation. 60 being so close, and if that was the intentions, you would have seen shorter term money coming in to at least make that dollar to 60, and that just wasn't the case. And
Mm.
we ended up breaking back under, and then we had a really nice short position at 61 that ended up coming back in, and then we ended up coming all the way down to about 57.50, the next psychological level, which was so on the flip side of that, not getting that off level shorter term traders coming in that are standing out, and then you see those short term positions coming in. So I mean, on the kind of the flip side of that, I mean, without that off level, you know, you're really already leaning towards that continuation not being there, even though the prints, eventually say higher.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it comes back to why we call it ahead of the charts. It's that the prints that come out determine what the chart's going to end up looking like. So, when you're looking to go back towards a building trade, the prints themselves with no shorter term prints, your percentages go way higher. The last thing I want to do is take a number one trade and start trying to build on someone when all there is it's surrounded by shorter term prints.
That's a
Because
recipe
that
for
person's
disaster.
telling me, our assumption we always have to make is that the market maker is always going to be correct. And it doesn't matter which market maker it is. So if you get one that looks like building, okay, but there's a bunch of short term that comes into it, well, they're telling us that person that showed that they needed that, if it was just them, showed they needed to build a lot, they don't actually have to because of those supporting prints that come in. And I think that by far is the easiest way to really tell which side of the scale the personality is going to be.
Hmm. So, what is the difference between personality of data and stock? How do we use those in tandem and combination? Like, overall, I think I do less of analyzing personality of day than stock, and maybe that's an issue of mine, something I need to work on. But overall, I've noticed through my journals, I focus a lot more on personality of stock than overall day.
Yeah, and that's the way it should be, because when you think about personality of day, it's going to be a lot of everyday type stocks, stocks that are going to be following the market and stuff like that. Because the whole market might have no follow through, but there might be a stock you pull up that just has the best short-term prints in the world, shows all the volume, the follow through that you need coming into it. Really, what personality of day becomes is a collaboration almost of every stock that you've looked at. And if they're all following some type of pattern, that's where the overall day comes from. But you can't just base something off of an overall day, because like you said, there's some stocks that are just going to pop up and they're going to have nothing to do with anything else that's going on with that. So it really starts with the breakdown of day. But let's say you've watched it's a couple hours and you've watched 10 different stocks and they're all doing the same thing. Now that's something that I'm going to put in my back pocket and keep in the back of my mind, knowing this keeps happening.
Mm.
Right? That doesn't necessarily mean there's a stock that's going to completely go against that, but I do know that my chances of follow through on a day with no follow through are going to be pretty lower. So what I do in a situation like that, if I see a ton of stocks just not really getting those pushes, not getting the follow through, not going past, I up what percentage I'm looking for my trades.
Mm.
So it's not necessarily a trade itself that I'm using that personality of day for. It's more along how am I going about my game plan of trading with that personality of day.
Gotcha.
But it actually comes back to each individual stock,
Right.
because you can't just be biased when a stock is telling you exactly what it's going to do. But overall, if I just keep seeing it happen over and over and over and over again, I can see that's kind of, it's starting to fit into there. I'm not going to stop taking high percentage trades. I'm just going to be, if well, let's say my number's 70 and 70 is the lowest percent trade I want, I'm going to be at 80 now. I'm going to give myself that little bit extra, because that 80, that extra 10% is going, is going to get me and stop me from going into, one of those stocks that doesn't have that follow through. And giving it a higher percent chance to have follow through because it's a higher percent trade.
So just adjusting some expectations there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because personality day is never going to affect an individual trade that I see.
Right.
Because we can see, especially a cheaper stock comes out, it's not going to be following the market. It can do whatever the hell it wants,
Mm.
news or whatever the catalyst of why it started to move like that. But when I keep seeing the same thing over and over again, and I'm not going to expect a different result.
Right.
I'm going to base, what I'm looking for off of what I keep seeing.
Yeah, and with that concept of, everyday stocks, I think that's more relevant with that, personality of day rather than,
Mhm.
personality of stock. And that's something that I've transitioned to from away from was, watching every day to now I'm just looking for those 15-minute of fame type of stocks, or maybe the stocks that are just hot, in the last for a few days, because, the market makers need to make their money, and they need to make their money in a relatively quick time frame. So kind of transitioning from that into print personality, why is print personality so important to understand? And I know when I was a student early on, like 2018, 2019, print personality wasn't an established, concept back then. It was something that was present within how we were, learning and trading, but the definition of it and how we defined it was not there. And I think it's a lot clearly defined now to be able to just like analyze than it was back then. So why is the print personality such an important concept to understand?
Well, just going back first to to the original. So print personality has always been there. You could go
Yeah,
back to recordings I've done, from 7 years ago. And print personality was always there. We just didn't assign names to it. And obviously, the more I teach, the better I'm going to get at teaching, because
right.
nothing's changed at all. There's no new things that are going to be popping out there. So really, what the way that my teaching changes is that it's more of a way to assign something black and white to allow people to be able to understand how to interpret something. So what print personality really is and why it's so important is because if you don't know what on average a stock prints, and when I say the way that it prints in the bursts that it prints, so whether on average when you see prints over 1,000 or a market maker come in, they're printing, it takes them 4 prints. Let's say the print personality is 4. If I don't know that, how do I know what stands out? How do I know what's not enough? And it comes back down to the scale again. I need to set a baseline to understand how to interpret anything else that's going on, because it's all relative. I could have one stock that it's on average every time it prints. I always use Siri as my example. SIRI, because typically you're going to see, it has 20 bursts of 20, bursts of 30. So that doesn't really stand, if you have a burst of 30 that comes in, that's not really standing out in comparison to a stock that typically the bigger traders are coming in printing, 2 prints at a time, 3 prints at a time. 6 prints is huge in that stock. Where if you take the same 6 prints and you put them in series, it means absolutely nothing. So it's again, it all comes down to a way to set a baseline of how to interpret what's going on average. Because if you have an average, now you can understand what's not enough and you can understand what is enough or what's way more than enough. Because that average is enough. And then it comes down to, so when you have way more, when you have way less. Way less we're not going to use because is that someone I really want to follow with my hard-earned money? Of course not.
Nope.
If it's way more, I have to understand, well, my mindset's a little bit different because that person, if they show that much, they're really not interested in making their money right this second. They're interested in a longer term game type plan. So that's why print personality, without it, you can't, it's almost impossible to tape read because then you're taking a guess on what might look like a lot. There should be no thinking. The whole point of the way I teach and the whole thing about tape reading is there's no thought process. Someone that's way smarter than us and has way more connections than us knows things. Okay. And I don't care how they get their information or what it is, but I know that if they're continuously wrong, they won't be there anymore. So it's not going to matter eventually. So I have to be under the assumption that they're always going to be correct. They need to know what's actually going to happen within the stock. So print personality is it's impossible to set a way to interpret something without having, like I said, and I always use the word baseline, but you can call whatever you want to call it. I need that middle ground or that average ground. It's one of the things, I don't use any indicators, but if you look at my volume, there's all, percentages, the average, average volume per minute. Okay, on the minute chart or average volume per, whatever chart, but it's not an indicator, it's just an average. Because I understand that averages eventually have to work out. So when something's way under average or something's way over average, I now know how to interpret that. So a print personality is our baseline to be able to interpret what we see going on out there.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes to the scale aspect. The more I kind of realize in personality comes to the scale, right? One being too much, the other opposite side is not enough, and in the middle is just enough for that trade or that increment to work out. So with print personality at major levels, we assign that scale, right? So sometimes we'll get, say, extremely massive ask at a level that is, like a 50 level and it's just pages and pages and pages. Obviously, that's the right of that extreme. And what that tells us is overall, that's not someone who's, shorter term. That's definitely someone who's longer term. Therefore, they have to build on that position. So, I mean, with that baseline being said, how do we fit that baseline into personality with the personality of the stock and then also that personality of the print? How do those two work in tandem?
So it's a little bit different when you start to bring up major levels because that has a lot to do with orders now as well. So print personality, when someone does it like an off level or something like that, then that it's very standout. It's very obvious of what our expectations can be. But the problem is that for instance, you see that huge amount of ask that comes in at 50. That doesn't mean, let's say it's the same stock, okay, same amount of prints. Let's just make up a number. Let's say it's 20 prints at a level, and you get 20 prints at a 50 level. That's not necessarily the same as 20 prints at a 48 level. So we have to kind of take into account where are the pockets of volume almost guaranteed to be. So when we see those 20 prints coming at that 50 level, yeah, it's a lot. And, but our expectation of volume at that level is pretty high. There's going to be a lot of people looking to get involved at that spot. That's just why it's almost the same, relevant information when you get nothing at a level like that, when the volume will be high. That gives you its own story within itself. So at major levels, you really have to start to take into account what's available out there. If someone buys those same 20 prints at 48, that means a whole different story because there's actually a little bit more behind it. We can expect there to be more behind it because 48 is just a random level. If you how many people out there see 48 and it's like, okay, it's time to buy. just not a psychological number, just not a number that because 50 is right above, you have 45 right below, 47, 50 right below. And it changes your expectations of that. Because if they're doing that at 48, that means that they really are trying to get their shares versus doing it at 50 when there's just that's what it was available. So it almost gives you a different insight depending on where it is, how much it is, and based off the overall print personality of the stock, how to interpret what you're actually seeing.
Yeah, that's a completely different perspective, right? Kind of looking into terms of availability at that level. That translates as well to off level because difficulty of trade. We say off level, print personality is maybe 3, and we end up getting 15. Is that kind of the same concept as well?
So to a certain extent, because there's sometimes, so you really, this is, it comes down to orders for a big part
Mhm.
of it. Because there's sometimes at a random level, like, 482 or 516 or something like that, you're going to see a big order out there. So if that person just hits the big order, they're really just telling you they want a lot of shares quickly when they could have coming into that off level. But if there's no order there and then you see that, something's behind that. Now I'm going to be expecting a little bit more of a pullback. I'm going to be expecting it to act like an off level print, but a little bit more towards a controlling print. So again, you have controlling prints, which, let's set our scale. We have controlling prints that don't move a stock whatsoever. We have off level prints that move it almost instantaneous, right? So we got to find where's that middle ground again. So when we get that middle ground is, if we're setting our scale like this and the middle is right there, our scale on a stock like that is going to go a little bit more now towards the building aspect. It's still going to be on the side of the off-level prints, but there's still some build attributes added towards it now because of that factor. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So if the
Yeah.
order was there, they're still going to be on the scale with it's still going to be shorter term with more with a little bit closer to a building aspect. But if the order is there, then at that point I'm going to expect a lot longer and a lot more of a build than if there was no order there and all of a sudden you see that difficulty of trade, someone just pops out at that
Mhm.
random level.
Yeah.
So literally just the way that it happens is a completely different interpretation. It's overall the same interpretation, but what our expectations in what it needs to do in the shorter time frame changes drastically.
Yeah, that time frame really changes a lot. That's such an advanced thought. You're looking at that scale, but that scale can change whether the order was there or not in availability, right?
Hmm.
Is what it comes down to. So,
Because the more information we have on the person, the more we could see exactly what they're looking to do.
right. So in terms of off-level print personality in that time frame wise, so what impacts the off-level time frame is, if that order was there and availability, size of the off-level, and whether it was, maybe at a 1 or something that's not at a 0 and a 5. So
Hmm.
that's the same psychology, right? Though behind something at a 0 or a 5, because there's more theoretically should be more available orders at a 0 and a 5,
100%.
right?
That's
So
why
that's a,
0 and 5s, I still call them off level, but I treat them a little bit more again on our scale. Now instead of it being off level on this all the way on the side of off level, it creeps over. It's into a little bit more of the middle of the build part.
mhm.
When off level at a 0.1, 2, 3, 4, or 6, 7, 8, 9, that is now over. It doesn't cross over into the building part. It gets closer to the building part, but doesn't actually cross over that middle threshold. And that's the way I'm going to take it as I actually see the prints.
Yeah, and I feel like I think what I'm gonna do moving forward is kind of maybe create a diagram and a chart because I feel like all those timing prints are so like subconsciously programmed within me. So like I see something
Hmm.
at a 0 and a 5 and I'm like, okay, that's gonna be a little longer term. But then I see something at like a 1 or a 3 or a 99, then my thought process that time frame is completely different. So I mean, I know like
That's
personally,
what
like
you're
I don't
talking
have
about.
an exact visual chart of maybe a scale of the different time frames, but I think just maybe for some people out there creating that visual could change the whole game.
Oh, absolutely. You see, in the class, I'll just pull up a paint thing, draw a line with two parts to the end and one in the middle. And it's
Yeah.
literally that's everything you need. Again, it's just in order to tape read, a lot of this is it's not feel, but it's by understanding what they're saying with the numbers that they're showing you, with the orders or
Hmm.
positions that they're taking, what they're showing you. So in without having an average and having the absurd parts of the scale that go to the extreme left and the extreme right, without having that how can we actually judge what we're seeing?
Yeah.
So
If you
it's vital to being
yeah,
able to take.
if you don't have that, I feel like at that point you're guessing. You don't truly know.
See,
And
that's the thing. You're thinking now. There should be no thinking involved. There should be this said this. This is what the stock personality is. This is what my expectations are. If it doesn't fit that expectation, doesn't make up for a high probability trade. It's that simple.
yeah,
And of
and
course, I'm saying it's that simple, but
yeah,
we all know.
once you get it and you got the whole concept in theory, it's very simple. But I think initially when you're in the beginning learning period, you're really thinking about it, and the thought process and it creeps up, and it just like the whole game plan process really gets clouded in terms of that aspect. But that whole scale aspect is something I remember we were bringing up. Obviously, there's been a lot more off-level prints that indicate timing as of late for number four trades. So with that, I brought up the scale aspect, and it seems like most people don't even visualize that scaling process of not enough off level, just enough off level, or too much off level. Because
Hmm.
when you're in a trade, that's everything. Especially if you're trying to get to that elite level, that tells you whether you're going to get a possible new entry, whether how much you should take off, and it's all percentage of trade management at that point. Yes, you have continuation of overall who you're following, but also in the shorter term time of things, it gives you your expectations of what's going to happen. And I think just creating that visual scale will change the game for all students really.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, and like you just said, the trade management aspect, especially when you're trading a stock that's got, a bigger spread or larger range or something like that. You might see these great off-level prints and the stock might still come down 50 cents. But that doesn't matter.
Right.
When in comparison, if you didn't have those short level and it came down 50 cents, well, now we can need to start managing in a different way. One, we might not take off anything. When one, we might have to take off half, depending or whatever the percentage is. But it
Yeah.
changes everything about what your expectations and what's going to happen are.
Yeah. No,
One of the things I always do is draw the chart. When I see prints come out, I see the chart further. So I
mm,
don't look at the chart right now. I look, well, this is what the chart should look like based off of what these prints say. And
mhm.
without having those averages and without having that, those scales, how could you do that?
And you do that with off level too, correct? Obviously, we have the market maker we're following at the controlling level, but you also do that with off level because that off level helps with timing. Say, we're entering a volume pattern or whatnot, setting up for that breakout for towards, for the market maker to make the money. You also like use those off level to draw as well from those instead of just, the controlling prints.
Oh, well, of course.
Yeah.
It's not going to check, it's not going to affect what my overall game plan,
Right.
because the market maker told me it needs to go someplace, then it needs to go someplace. I'm not worried about that. But like you said before, I'm still going to use that into my expectation of time frame.
hmm
For instance, if I get these great off level and stock pulls back on nothing, okay, that might be a spot to add. Okay, because all that's telling me is that the time frame's still quick. So that might be a good spot to add when in contrast, if there's no off level prints there and the stock starts pulling back, and even though it tells me even though the original person tells me it needs to go to a certain spot,
hmm
now that could be 20 minutes from now. That could be an hour from now. We might need to go down $1 first before that happens. So by getting those short-term prints, it helps you understand, do I need to keep just drawing, bars that are showing consolidation for another
hmm
20 minutes and then move? Or is it going to look more of like, like I was talking about before, the energy stocks where you get those quick moves and then it just keeps going on its way? That's a huge factor in your, not only, taking your trade, but the management of your actual position.
Yeah, and that's what it takes from being, maybe good or an acceptable trader through the 1 through 4 setup to a great trader or an elite trader is just that aspect of having everything defined on that scale of things, personality having that scale, print personality having that scale, off level personality having that scale. It almost feels like everything within tape reading fits on that scale, but that scale is a story. That scale is, this is what needs to happen on average in the middle, and then if it's either on one or the other, it's outlier, or it tells us overall just a story. So it's just like it's an outline of a percentage of stories. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, in my head, it's always going to be like the Matrix. And, when they're watching the zeros and ones or the binary code just
hmm
falling down the screen in green, but they're actually watching a picture. They're actually
Yeah,
watching a story going into it. That's exactly what tape reading is. You're
yeah.
taking numbers. Now, a big, one point I do want to bring up is that by having that scale and understanding, the personality of not only the stock, but the personality of what you're seeing within the prints, it also helps you take out a lot of noise.
Mm,
And that especially for people in the beginning stage. And when I say beginning stages, I'm talking about first 2 years of
yeah.
being a tape reader. You try to analyze things, everything. When
Yeah.
if you know what your scales are, 90, I wouldn't say 90, but at least like 50 to 60% of the things that you see don't even mean anything.
Yeah.
So it helps you kind of just take those completely out. You're not even paying attention to them. They affect nothing in what your actual game plan is going to be. And taking out the noise and knowing what not to look at is just as important as knowing what to look at.
Yeah. No, I've definitely noticed that. The more defined I am within that scale of, personality and prints and off-level prints, the less the noise is able to creep in there and really make a difference and, affect the overall trait of the game plan.
Hmm.
With that being said, I feel like that's such a phenomenal, overview of personality going into classes this coming next week. So, I mean, I think this is just going to be a perfect, lead up for that. So I do appreciate your time and, breaking down all these personalities for us.
No question, Dave. Always a pleasure.
Alrighty, Rich. Take care.
All right, man. I'll talk to you later.